Max was an ordinary 16-year-old kid in Springdale, a quiet town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. It was the kind of place where you could go years without locking your doors, and neighbors still watched out for each other. Life there was simple and predictable, until the Tuesday morning that would change Max's life forever. It started when Max opened his locker between classes, just like he did every day. But this time, something unusual happened. A plain, white envelope slipped out, landing softly on the floor. There was no stamp, no sender's address, just his name scrawled in bold letters. He looked around, but the bustling hallway of teenagers looked the same as ever. No one seemed to be watching him. Curious, Max picked it up, turning it over in his hands. After a moment, he ripped it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He skimmed the first few lines, his heart hammering as the words registered. Dear Max. This is you, writing from the future. You probably think this is a prank, but it's not. In 2 days, at exactly 4 p.m., there will be an accident. You'll be at the intersection of Elm Street and Maple Drive. Don't go there, no matter what. He read the letter over and over, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't his handwriting, but somehow, it felt familiar. He told himself it was just some elaborate prank. After all, he wasn't popular enough to be targeted by anyone, and he couldn't imagine any of his friends pulling something like this. Still, the words echoed in his mind throughout the day. Each time he tried to shrug it off, he felt a strange, nagging urge to take it seriously. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Who would go to such lengths just to scare him? And why would they warn him about an accident? The next day passed slowly, the letter's warning lingering at the back of his mind. Max found himself glancing at his watch constantly, waiting for 4 p.m. to come. As the clock ticked closer, he felt a pit of anxiety form in his stomach. He didn't know what would happen, but he wasn't going to be at Elm and Maple to find out. At 3:58 p.m., he was walking home, taking a detour far from the intersection. He kept looking around, feeling nervous and a little silly. Then, he heard it, a sudden screeching of tires, followed by a sickening crash. Max's heart raced as he sprinted toward the source of the sound, and when he reached Elm and Maple, he froze. 2 cars were smashed together, metal crunched and twisted. In one of the cars, he saw Mr. Turner, his math teacher, leaning over the wheel, dazed but alive. A shiver ran through Max. If he hadn't listened to the letter, if he had walked his usual route home, he would have been right there when the accident happened. That night, Max lay awake, his mind buzzing with questions. How had the letter known? Who sent it, and how had they predicted something so specific? Every theory he came up with sounded ridiculous. And yet, he couldn't ignore what had happened. Whoever sent the letter had somehow saved his life. Days passed, and Max tried to move on, telling himself it was just a strange coincidence. But then, just as he was about to forget about the letter, he found another envelope in his locker. His name was scrawled on it in the same handwriting. Heart pounding, he opened it and read, Max, do not take the hillside trail on your bike ride this Saturday. There will be a broken railing. It's dangerous. Avoid it. This time, the letter left Max feeling genuinely unsettled. The hillside trail was his favorite biking route, one he took nearly every weekend. The warning was so specific, and so eerily similar to the last one, that he couldn't brush it off. He texted his friends, saying he couldn't make it, claiming some family event as an excuse. His friends groaned and teased him, but in the end, they planned to meet up without him. That Saturday, Max felt uneasy, sitting at home while his friends biked the hillside trail without him. Later that evening, he got a message in the group chat. His friend Joey had skidded on a section of the trail where the railing was broken. He'd fallen partway down the hill and sprained his ankle. Max felt a chill. Once again, the letter had saved him. Max had to tell someone, so he turned to his best friend, Ethan. They had been friends since elementary school, inseparable through every phase of their lives. Max could tell Ethan anything, and he thought maybe Ethan would help him make sense of it all. But even Ethan was stumped. Maybe someone's just looking out for you, he said, his brow furrowed as he studied the letter. Or maybe you've got a super intense secret admirer. Max chuckled, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. As he walked home, the weight of the letters bore down on him. The warnings were becoming disturbingly specific, each one predicting something that actually happened. The next few weeks were filled with more letters, each containing new warnings. They came almost like clockwork. Another letter, another life-threatening scenario narrowly avoided. He stopped trying to figure out who was sending them, but the details of each note became increasingly personal. There were notes about his conversations, things he'd only shared with close friends. Each one seemed to know more about him than the last, and the unsettling feeling grew with every warning. It wasn't long before Max began to doubt the sincerity of the letters. How could they possibly be from his future self? If someone knew this much about him, it had to be someone close. Someone he trusted. He tried to brush it off, but the thought kept gnawing at him. Eventually, his suspicions grew so strong that he started wondering about Ethan. Ethan knew more about him than anyone else did, and lately, he'd seemed different. At first, Max hated himself for even considering it. Ethan was his best friend. But his mind kept coming back to him, the way he seemed almost too interested in the letters, how he was always there whenever Max mentioned them. One evening, another letter appeared. This time, the tone felt frantic, desperate. Max, do not go to the annual bonfire. Something terrible will happen. Please listen this time. This warning was different. It was less detailed, more urgent. The bonfire was the biggest event of the year in Springdale. Everyone went, including half the town. Max could barely believe it. Why would someone want him to stay away from something so harmless? He decided he was done listening to these letters, done letting them control his life. When he told Ethan about the letter, Ethan's reaction seemed strange. He was quiet for a long moment, looking almost uneasy. You really think you should go, Max? Ethan asked, his voice tight. Max laughed. Why not? These letters have kept me from doing half the things I normally do. I'm going. Ethan didn't argue, but his silence spoke volumes. When the night of the bonfire came, Max went with a mix of excitement and dread. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he couldn't let another warning dictate his choices. As the flames roared high into the sky and laughter filled the air, Max felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about letters or accidents. He was just a kid enjoying a night out. But the relief didn't last long. As the night wore on, he noticed Ethan watching him, his expression unreadable. Something was off. After a while, Max couldn't keep his thoughts to himself any longer. Ethan, I need to ask you something, he said, pulling him aside. Have you been sending these letters? Ethan looked at him, his eyes dark. He seemed to consider lying, but then he let out a long breath. Yes, Max. It was me. I wrote the letters. Max felt the ground shift beneath him. Why would you do that? Why would you scare me like this? Ethan's face twisted, a strange mix of anger and desperation. Because you don't listen, Max. You take risks, you go on all these adventures, and you never think about the consequences. I was trying to protect you. Max took a step back, the weight of Ethan's words hitting him like a punch. Protect me? By controlling me? Ethan's voice was calm, almost too calm. You don't get it. I needed you to understand that you can't always do whatever you want. You have to be careful. And if you won't be, then I will. The bonfire's warmth faded, replaced by a chill that seeped into Max's bones. He realized now that the letters hadn't been warnings. They had been manipulations, attempts to keep him under control. Ethan had used his fears against him, turning his life into a series of calculated moves. Max took a step back. Ethan, that's not protecting me. That's controlling me. You were trying to make me afraid, trying to make me think I needed you. A flicker of anger crossed Ethan's face. Maybe I was, Max. But everything I did was for you. Max turned, fear racing through him as he realized how close he'd come to danger. The warnings had always been about Ethan's twisted sense of protection. He ran, determined to escape the tangled web his friend had spun around him. As he got further from the bonfire, he could feel the weight lift, knowing he was finally free of the letters, and of the friend he thought he could trust.